George Mario Pedro Vargas Llosa, 1st Marquis of Vargas Llosa, more commonly known as Mario Vargas Llosa, is a Peruvian writer, politician, journalist, essayist, college professor and recipient of the 2010 Nobel Prize in Literature. Vargas Llosa is one of Latin America's most significant novelists and essayists, and one of the leading writers of his generation. Some critics consider him to have had a larger international impact and worldwide audience than any other writer of the Latin American boom. Upon announcing the 2010 Nobel Prize in Literature, the Swedish Academy said it had been given to Vargas Llosa for his cartography of structures of power and his trenchant images of the individual's resistance, revolt, and defeat. Vargas Llosa rose to fame in the 1960s with novels such as The Time of the Hero, The Greenhouse, and The Monumental Conversation in the Cathedral. He writes prolifically across an array of literary genres, including literary criticism and journalism. His novels include comedies, murder mysteries, historical novels, and political thrillers. Several, such as Captain Pantoja and the Special Service and Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter, have been adapted as feature films. Many of Vargas Llosa's works are influenced by the writer's perception of Peruvian society and his own experiences as a native Peruvian. Increasingly, however, he has expanded his range and tackled themes that arise from other parts of the world. In his essays, Vargas Llosa has made many criticisms of nationalism in different parts of the world. Another change over the course of his career has been a shift from a style and approach associated with literary modernism, to a sometimes playful postmodernism. Like many Latin American writers, Vargas Llosa has been politically active throughout his career. Over the course of his life, he has gradually moved from the political left towards liberalism. While he initially supported the Cuban revolutionary government of Fidel Castro, Vargas Llosa later became disenchanted with his policies. He ran for the Peruvian presidency in 1990 with the center-right Frente Democrático coalition, advocating classical liberal reforms, but lost the election to Alberto Fujimori. He is the person who, in 1990, coined the phrase that circled the globe, declaring on Mexican television, "Mexico is the perfect dictatorship," a statement which became an adage during the following decade. In 1995, he wrote and published a children's book called Hitos y Mitos Literarios, which is illustrated by Willy Glassauer, and published by Círculo de Lectores. Early life and family. Mario Vargas Llosa was born to a middle-class family on March 28, 1936, in the Peruvian provincial city of Arequipa. He was the only child of Ernesto Vargas Maldonado and Dora Llosa Ureta, who separated a few months before his birth. Shortly after Mario's birth, his father revealed that he was having an affair with a German woman. Consequently, Mario has two younger half-brothers, Enrique and Ernesto Vargas. Vargas Llosa lived with his maternal family in Arequipa until a year after his parents' divorce, when his maternal grandfather was named honorary consul for Peru in Bolivia. With his mother and her family, Vargas Llosa then moved to Cochabamba, Bolivia, where he spent the early years of his childhood. His maternal family, the Llosas, were sustained by his grandfather, who managed a cotton farm. As a child, Vargas Llosa was led to believe that his father had died. His mother and her family did not want to explain that his parents had separated. During the government of Peruvian President José Bustamante y Rivero, Vargas Llosa's maternal grandfather obtained a diplomatic post in the Peruvian coastal city of Piura, and the entire family returned to Peru. While in Piura, Vargas Llosa attended attended elementary school at the Religious Academy Colegio Salesiano. In 1946, at the age of 10, he moved to Lima and met his father for the first time. His parents re-established the relationship and lived in Magdalena del Mar, a middle-class Lima suburb, during his teenage years. While in Lima, he studied at the Colegio La Salle, a Christian middle school, from 1947 to 1949. When Vargas Llosa was 14, his father sent him to the Leoncio Prado Military Academy in Lima. At the age of 16, before his graduation, Vargas Llosa began working as an amateur journalist for local newspapers. He withdrew from the military academy and finished his studies in Piura, where he worked for the local newspaper, La Industria, and witnessed the theatrical performance of his first dramatic work, La Fuida del Inca. In 1953, during the government of Manuel A. Odria, Vargas Llosa enrolled in Lima's National University of San Marcos to study law and literature. He married Julia Urquidi, his maternal uncle's sister-in-law, in 1955 at the age of 19. She was 10 years older. Vargas Llosa began his literary career in earnest in 1957 with the publication of his first short stories, The Leaders, and The Grandfather, while working for two Peruvian newspapers. Upon his graduation from the National University of San Marcos in 1958, he received a scholarship to study at the Complutense University of Madrid in Spain. In 1960, after his scholarship in Madrid had expired, Vargas Llosa moved to France under the impression that he would receive a scholarship to study there. However, upon arriving in Paris, he learned that his scholarship request was denied. Despite Mario and Julia's unexpected financial status, the couple decided to remain in Paris, where he began to write prolifically. The marriage lasted only a few more years, ending in divorce in 1964. A year later, Vargas Llosa married his first cousin, Patricia Llosa, with whom he had 3 children: Alvaro Vargas Llosa, a writer and editor; Gonzalo, a businessman; and Morgana, a photographer. As of 2015, he is in a relationship with Filipino-Spanish socialite and TV personality Isabel Preisler and seeking a divorce from Patricia Llosa. Writing career. Beginning and first major works. Vargas Llosa's first novel, The Time of the Hero, was published in 1963. The book is set among a community of cadets in a Lima military school, and the plot is based on the author's own experiences at Lima's Leoncio Prado Military Academy. This early piece gained wide public attention and immediate success. Its vitality and adept use of sophisticated literary techniques immediately impressed critics, and it won the Premio de la Crítica Española award. Nevertheless, its sharp criticism of the Peruvian military establishment led to controversy in Peru. Several Peruvian generals attacked the novel, claiming that it was the work of a degenerate mind, and stating that Vargas Llosa was paid by Ecuador to undermine the prestige of the Peruvian army. In 1965, Vargas Llosa published his second novel, The Greenhouse, about a brothel called The Greenhouse, and how its quasi-mythical presence affects the lives of the characters. The main plot follows Bonifacia, a girl who is about to receive the vows of the church, and her transformation into La Selvatica, the best-known prostitute of The Greenhouse. The novel was immediately acclaimed, confirming Vargas Llosa as an important voice of Latin American narrative. The Greenhouse won the first edition of the Romulo Gallegos International Nobel Prize in 1967, contending with works by veteran Uruguayan writer Juan Carlos Onetti and by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This novel alone accumulated enough awards to place the author among the leading figures of the Latin American boom. Some critics still consider The Greenhouse to be Vargas Llosa's finest and most important achievement. Indeed, Latin American literary critic Gerald Martin suggests that The Greenhouse is one of the greatest novels to have emerged from Latin America. Vargas Llosa's third novel, Conversation in the Cathedral, was published in 1969, when he was 33. This ambitious narrative is the story of Santiago Zavala, the son of a government minister, and Ambrosio, his chauffeur. A random meeting at a dog pound leads the pair to a riveting conversation at a nearby bar known as the Cathedral. During the encounter, Zavala searches for the truth about his father's role in the murder of a notorious Peruvian underworld figure, shedding light on the workings of a dictatorship along the way. Unfortunately for Zavala, his quest results in a dead end with no answers and no sign of a better future. The novel attacks the dictatorial government of Odria by showing how a dictatorship controls and destroys lives. The persistent theme of hopelessness makes Conversation in the Cathedral Vargas Llosa's most bitter novel. He lectured Spanish-American literature at King's College London from 1969 to 1970. 1970s and the discovery of humor. In 1971, Vargas Llosa published Garcia Marquez' Story of a Deicide, which was his doctoral thesis for the Complutense University of Madrid. Although Vargas Llosa wrote this book-length study about his then-friend, the Colombian Nobel laureate writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, they did not speak to each other again. In 1976, Vargas Llosa punched Garcia Marquez in the face in Mexico City at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, ending the friendship. Neither writer had publicly stated the underlying reasons for the quarrel. A photograph of Garcia Marquez sporting a black eye was published in 2007, reigniting public interest in the feud. Despite the decades of silence, in 2007, Vargas Llosa agreed to allow a part of his book to be used as the introduction to a 40th anniversary edition of Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, which was re-released in Spain and throughout Latin America that year. Historia de un Deicidio was also reissued in that year, as part of Vargas Llosa's complete works. Following the monumental work Conversation in the Cathedral, Vargas Llosa's output shifted away from more serious themes such as politics and problems with society. Latin American literary scholar Raymond L. Williams describes this phase in his writing career as the discovery of humor. His first attempt at a satirical novel was Captain Pantoja and the Special Service, published in 1973. This short, comic novel offers vignettes of dialogues and documents about the Peruvian armed forces and a corps of prostitutes assigned to visit military outposts in remote jungle areas. These plot elements are similar to Vargas Llosa's earlier novel The Greenhouse, but in a different form. As such, Captain Pantoja and the Special Service is essentially a parody of both The Greenhouse and the literary approach that novel represents. Vargas Llosa's motivation to write the novel came from actually witnessing prostitutes being hired by the Peruvian army and brought to serve soldiers in the jungle. From 1974 to 1987, Vargas Llosa focused on his writing, but also took the time to pursue other endeavors. In 1975, he co-directed an unsuccessful motion picture adaptation of his novel, Captain Pantoja and the Secret Service. In 1976, he was elected president of PEN International, the worldwide association of writers and oldest human rights organization, a position he held until 1979. During this time, Vargas Llosa constantly traveled to speak at conferences organized by internationally renowned institutions, such as the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the University of Cambridge, where he was Simon Bolivar Professor and an Overseas Fellow of Churchill College in 1977–78. In 1977, Vargas Llosa was elected as a member of the Peruvian Academy of Language, a membership he still holds today. That year, he also published Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter, based in part on his marriage to his first wife, Julia Urquidi, to whom he dedicated the novel. She later wrote a memoir, Lo que Varguitas no dijo, in which she gives her personal account of the relationship. She states that Vargas Llosa's account exaggerates many negative points in their courtship and marriage while minimizing her role of assisting his literary career. Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter is considered one of the most striking examples of how the language and imagery of popular culture can be used in literature. The novel was adapted in 1990 into a Hollywood feature film, Tune In Tomorrow. Later novels. Vargas Llosa's fourth major novel, The War of the End of the World, was published in 1981 and was his first attempt at a historical novel. This work initiated a radical change in Vargas Llosa's style towards themes such as messianism and our irrational human behavior. It recreates the War of Canudos, an incident in 19th-century Brazil in which an armed millenarian cult held off a siege by the National Army for months. As in Vargas Llosa's earliest work, this novel carries a sober and serious theme, and its tone is dark. Vargas Llosa's bold exploration of humanity's propensity to idealize violence, and his account of a man-made catastrophe brought on by fanaticism on all sides, earned the novel substantial recognition. Because of the book's ambition and execution, critics have argued that this is one of Vargas Llosa's greatest literary pieces. Even though the novel has been acclaimed in Brazil, it was initially poorly received because a foreigner was writing about a Brazilian theme. The book was also criticized as revolutionary and anti-socialist. Vargas Llosa says that this book is his favorite and was his most difficult accomplishment. After completing The War of the End of the World, Vargas Llosa began to write novels that were significantly shorter than many of his earlier books. In 1983, he finished The Real Life of Alejandro Mater. The novel focuses on a leftist insurrection that took place on May 29, 1962 in the Andean city of Jaya. Later the same year, during the Sendero Luminoso uprising, Vargas Llosa was asked by the Peruvian president Fernando Belauntre to join the Investigatory Commission, a task force to inquire into the massacre of 8 journalists at the hands of the villagers of Uchirique. The commission's main purpose was to investigate the murders in order to provide information regarding the incident to the public. Following his involvement with the Investigatory Commission, Vargas Llosa published a series of articles to defend his position in the affair. In 1986, he completed his next novel, Who Killed Palomino Mulro, which he began writing shortly after the end of the Uchirique investigation. Though the plot of this mystery novel is similar to the tragic events at Uchirique, literary critic Roy Boland points out that it was not an attempt to reconstruct the murders, but rather a literary exorcism of Vargas Llosa's own experiences during the commission. The experience also inspired one of Vargas Llosa's later novels, Death in the Andes, originally published in 1993 in Barcelona. It would be almost 20 years before Vargas Llosa wrote another major work. The Feast of the Goat, a political thriller, was published in 2000. According to Williams, it is Vargas Llosa's most complete and most ambitious novel since The War of the End of the World. Critics have been Coelman-Cesar in the line of his earlier novels such as Conversación en la Catedral, depicting the effects of authoritarianism, violence and the abuse of power on the individual, based on the dictatorship of Rafael Rafael Trujillo, who governed the Dominican Republic from 1930 until his assassination in 1961. The novel has three main strands. One concerns Urania Cabral, the daughter of a former politician and Trujillo loyalist, who returns for the first time since leaving the Dominican Republic after Trujillo's assassination 30 years earlier. The second concentrates on the assassination itself, the conspirators who carry it out, and its consequences, and the third and final strand deals with Trujillo himself in scenes from the end of his regime. The book quickly received positive reviews in Spain and Latin America, and has had a significant impact in Latin America, being regarded as one of Vargas Llosa's best works. In 2003 he wrote The Way to Paradise, where he studies Flora Tristan and Paul Gauguin. In 2006 Vargas Llosa read The Bad Girl, which journalist Catherine Harrison argues is a rewrite of Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary. In Vargas Llosa's version, the plot relates the decades-long obsession of its narrator, a Peruvian expatriate in Paris, with a woman with whom he first fell in love when both were teenagers. Later life and political involvement. Like many other Latin American intellectuals, Vargas Llosa was initially a supporter of the Cuban revolutionary government of Fidel Castro. He studied Marxism in depth as a university student and was later persuaded by communist ideals after the success of the Cuban Revolution. Gradually, Vargas Llosa came to believe that Cuban socialism was incompatible with what he considered to be general liberties and freedoms. The official rupture between the writer and the policies of the Cuban government occurred with the so-called Badillo affair, when the Castro regime imprisoned the poet Gilberto Badillo for a month in 1971. Vargas Llosa, along with other intellectuals of the time, wrote to Castro protesting the Cuban political system and its imprisonment of the artist. Vargas Llosa has identified himself with liberalism rather than extreme left-wing political ideologies ever since. Since he relinquished his earlier leftism, he has opposed both left and right-wing authoritarian regimes. With his appointment to the Investigatory Commission on the Uchuruque massacre in 1983, he experienced what literary critic Jean Franco calls the most uncomfortable event in political career. Unfortunately for Vargas Llosa, his involvement with the Investigatory Commission led to immediate negative reactions and defamation from the Peruvian press. Many suggested that the massacre was a conspiracy to keep the journalists from reporting the presence of government paramilitary forces in Uchuruque. The commission concluded that it was the indigenous villagers who had been responsible for the killings. For Vargas Llosa, the incident showed how vulnerable democracy is in Latin America and how easily it dies under dictatorships of the right and left. These conclusions, and Vargas Llosa personally, came under intense criticism. Anthropologist Enrique Mayet, for instance, accused him of paternalism, while fellow anthropologist Carlos Ivan de Gregory criticized him for his ignorance of the Andean world. Vargas Llosa was accused of actively colluding in a government cover-up of army involvement in the massacre. U.S. Latin American literature scholar Misha Kokotovich summarizes that the novelist was charged with seeing indigenous cultures as a primitive obstacle to the full realization of his Western model of modernity. Shocked both by the atrocity itself and then by the reaction his report had provoked, Vargas Llosa responded that his critics were apparently more concerned with his report than with the hundreds of peasants who would later die at the hands of the Sendero Luminoso guerrilla organization. Over the course of the decade, Vargas Llosa became known as ethnoliberal, although he personally dislikes the term and considers it pure nonsense and only used for derision. In 1987, he helped form and soon became a leader of the Movimiento Libertad. The following year his party entered a coalition with the parties of Peru's two principal conservative politicians at the time, ex-President Fernando Belaunte and Luis Bedoya Reyes, to form the tripartite center-right coalition known as Frente Democrático. He ran for the presidency of Peru in 1990 as the candidate of the FREDEMO coalition. He proposed a drastic economic austerity program that frightened most of the country's poor. This program emphasized the need for privatization, a market economy, free trade, and most importantly, the dissemination of private property. Although he won the first round with 34% of the vote, Vargas Llosa was defeated by then unknown agricultural engineer Alberto Fujimori. In the subsequent runoff, Vargas Llosa included an account of his run for the presidency in the memoir A Fish in the Water. Since his political defeat, he has focused mainly on his writing, with only occasional political involvement. A month after losing the election, at the invitation of Octavio Paz, Vargas Llosa attended a conference in Mexico entitled The 20th Century, The Experience of Freedom, focused on the collapse of communist rule in Central and Eastern Europe. It was broadcast on Mexican television from the 27th of August to the 2nd of September. Addressing the conference on the 30th of August 1990, Vargas Llosa embarrassed his hosts by condemning the Mexican system of power based on the rule of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which had been in power for 61 years. Criticizing the PRI by name, he commented, "I don't believe that there has been in Latin America any case of a system of dictatorship which has so efficiently recruited the intellectual milieu, bribing it with great subtlety." Quote, he declared, "Mexico is the perfect dictatorship. The perfect dictatorship is not communism, not the USSR, not Fidel Castro. The perfect dictatorship is Mexico, because it is a camouflaged dictatorship." The statement, "Mexico is the perfect dictatorship," became a cliché in Mexico and internationally, until the PRI fell from power in 2000. Vargas Llosa has mainly lived in Madrid since the 1990s, but spends roughly 3 months of the year in Peru with his extended family. He also frequently visits London, where he occasionally spends long periods. Vargas Llosa acquired Spanish citizenship in 1993, though he still holds Peruvian nationality. The writer often reiterates his love for both countries. In his Nobel speech he observed, "I carry Peru deep inside me because that is where I was born, grew up, was formed, and lived. Those experiences of childhood and youth that shaped my personality and forged my calling." He then added, "I love Spain as much as Peru, and my debt to her is as great as my gratitude. If not for Spain, I never would have reached this podium or become a known writer." In 1994 he was elected a member of the Real Academia Española. He took up CETEL on the 15th of January 1996. He has been involved in the country's political arena. In February 2008 he stopped supporting the People's Party in favor of the recently created Union of Progress and Democracy, claiming that certain conservative views held by the former party are at odds with his classical liberal beliefs. His political ideologies appear in the book Politica Razonable, written with Fernando Cerveta, Rosa Diaz, Alvaro Pombo, Albert Bodella and Carlos Martinez Goriaran. He continues to write both journalism and fiction, and to travel extensively. He has also taught as a visiting professor at a number of prominent universities. On November 18, 2010, Vargas Llosa received the honorary degree of letters from the City College of New York of the City University of New York, where he also delivered the President's Lecture. On 4 February 2011, Vargas Llosa was raised into the Spanish nobility by King Juan Carlos I with the hereditary title of Marquis de Vargas Llosa. In April 2011, the writer took part in the Peruvian general election 2011 by saying he was going to vote for Alejandro Toledo. After casting his vote, he said his country should stay in the path of legality and freedom. As for hobbies, Vargas Llosa is very fond of association football, and is a renowned supporter of Universitario de Deportes. The writer himself has confessed in his book A Fishing in the Water since childhood he has been a fan of the cream-colored team from Peru, which was first seen in the field one day in 1946 when he was only 10 years old. In February 2011, Vargas Llosa was awarded with an honorary life membership of this football club, in a ceremony which took place in the monumental stadium of Lima. He was named in the Panama Papers released by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists on 10 May 2016.